I welcome you to this review of transparent Chennai's heritage layer. Chennai has a rich architectural inheritance which reflects its historical relationship with Southeast Asia, the Portuguese, the French, the Danes, and of course the British. In the absence of a strong legislation and an authoritative body to oversee conservation, heritage sites and buildings in Chennai would soon become the stuff of legend. Simply making it to the High Court appointed Padmanabhan Committee report was not enough to protect Kalas Mahal, that was recently ravaged by fire, or Pure and Sons, which is under threat from metro rail construction activity. Monuments that are preserved by the Archaeological Survey of India are the lucky minority, but the non-monuments face the danger from real estate sharks that are encouraged by a state and local government that is apathetic to its conservation. Digitally representing built heritage includes collecting information about the buildings and their architects that is maintained in files by different individuals and organizations, and collating the stories that surround the buildings from their past creation to their current use. Unfortunately, rapid, unplanned urbanization has ridden roughshod over the architecture of the city, and even current residents of some heritage buildings are not aware of their historical significance. Posters, hoardings, encroachments, garbage dumps, and general decay render some of these past treasures unrecognizable. With the builders, architects, and original inhabitants of these buildings long gone, there is a need for residents to take action to save the memories of our history. Transparent Chennai is working hard to place heritage on the map, and students from IIT Madras and Madras, who are interning with Transparent Chennai for the summer, are doing their bit. Armed with a list of nearly 500 structures listed in the Padmanabhan Committee report, last week the students walked around Georgetown and Fort St. George with GPS units marking the physical locations of these buildings, some of which have already quietly disappeared. The Transparent Chennai team and the student interns search for the buildings by their old names, compare them to local residents' versions, and identify them using a brief description of their current state and old photographs. These buildings will be added to our newest layer on the interactive map, the heritage layer, which will show locations and information about heritage buildings all around the city. Transparent Chennai creates, collects, and disseminates maps, data, and research on neglected issues in the city, and works with residents to create data on issues of importance in the community. Creating a public database of these precious buildings will bring an invisible layer of the city to life and help to strengthen citizen advocacy for better conservation of our heritage. What you will see now is the first step in creating a useful resource for heritage enthusiasts. We plan to make the database interactive so that citizens can write their own stories about these and other heritage buildings and add structures that they think are important and help us make these maps more useful. Going forward, we will also work with INTACH and other organizations and individuals to visualize their databases and stories about heritage in the city. Before the preview of the heritage layer, I'd like to mention the efforts of a few people who have led this work to fruition. Roshan Toshniwal has single-handedly digitized the Padmanabhan Committee report list of heritage structures, which he then went on to map with the help of many interns. Prabhu, who couldn't be here today, provides the technological support for converting Transparent Chennai's research into visually appealing maps. And our student interns who have done a fantastic job in locating structures that are obscured by posters, graffiti, and other construction. Incidentally, they have also identified one very famous piece that you will see that should have been on the Padmanabhan Committee report but isn't. I now invite Roshan to tell us more about the features of the heritage layer and share his ideas for taking this forward, and also the interns to share their experience in mapping.
Thank you, Satyamka. So, as she talked about Transparent Chennai, we have this homepage of our website where you could click the build a map section or click in the center of the thing to have the maps. We work on these key issues in the city: inclusive planning, community mapping, sanitation, slums, public transport, and pedestrian issue, which is quite well researched. Then the heritage layer is the new layer or new addition that we try to bring in into this into our website. It's still in the beta stage, but hope to put it up on the main website soon. So when you go into the builder map section, you will see various layers. The city could be seen in various layers, and when you click a couple of layers together, you will find one interactive map together, and you could find the gaps in between these between the different types of infrastructure. So I divided. When we started with the heritage layer, I divided them in terms of location rather than dividing in chronological order or land use or architectural style, because I thought that was easier to locate. Like when you're looking for buildings in a particular area, heritage buildings in a particular area, it would be just to click a particular layer or a particular location and you get the whole sequence of things. But then it doesn't give a clear picture to everything. So as in each Padmanabhan report, it comprises of various parks, gardens, buildings, cemetery, burial halls, even statues. So we thought, okay, why not, arrange the layer in these formats? Maybe when you are doing, because the building is spread across 15th to 20th century, several buildings are spread across 15th to 20th century. So if you arrange it in chronological order, a more clearer picture as to how Chennai has walked down its memory lane, that could be evolved. Another was as per the land and building use, because there are gardens and trees and hostels and shore trees, so many of them lying across the city, which are in the heritage layer. So you could map as to, you want to reside in one of these old hostels or old hotels, you could look at that. And architects and architectural style. So primarily, two colonial architects have contributed largely in the Indian, in Chennai's heritage, Henry Irvin and Robert Chisholm. But there are several other architects also, both homegrown and colonial architects, who've done several works. So understanding their work, we would try to put that into picture. And this invisible heritage, which I hope to gather more data about from our guest speaker. So this is still in contention. So the heritage layer looks something like this in beta version right now. When you click the heritage layer and select particular location, the show heritage site polygon comes as a default. And then when you click on the heritage site, it populates the entire plots or rather the locations of buildings. And when you click a particular building or type, you get these information, the area, the location, the city, the street, the building name, grade, even the size, what is it made of, even if it has an architectural relevance. We're still yet to compile a lot of that, but this is directly taken from the Padmanabhan report. So thank you. I would like the interns to just share their experience, and then we can have Sriram talking about the entire experience.
Which is the set? No. This one, mapping.
Yeah, the mapping.
Good evening, everybody. I'm Vishnu, and I'm doing my first year in Humanities and Social Sciences at Madras. On 11th of May, 8 interns from Transfer and Chennai had gone out on a heritage mapping exercise. Well, I think recently there was an article in the news regarding the Pachepa College, which is around 170 years old and continues to be functional to this day. I think besides heritage sites like the Pachepa College, there are so many other sites in Chennai which most of us don't know about. And I think this exercise of heritage mapping helps us to realize this fact. Now, without much ado, I'll just go on to the first thing that we did.
Yes, you start.
The upper aspect. Well, frankly speaking, this is what took us the maximum amount of time to figure out, and it had us walking around 10 times on Prakasam Street. Well, I think when you look at it, as in about a few buildings from the upper Achakam, when we asked somebody where is the upper Achakam, they did not know about it. And after we finally realized, after we finally found out where it was, we realized that people whom we were asking were a part of a very cosmopolitan crowd. And those were people from different places, from different cultures, and they did not know about the Aparachikam, basically because it is not functional, or probably because many of them, or even people from that area did not know about it. So Aparachikam was a printing press, and around 1933, Anand Trigadan occupied Aparachikam when it wanted to expand its production, and it used the Aparachikam building until 1947, I guess. So yes, I think with respect to this context, especially in a context where there are people from different cultures, different lands coming and working together, I think even sites such as Aparachikam are representative of the history of a culture that or a history of Chennai as such. So in that sense, I think it is really important to look at these sites which are not so famous but yet contribute to the larger picture of Chennai's history. Moving on to the next building. Sorry. Yeah. David Yale and Joseph Himman. Well, for a bit of background information, the Yale University, which is the third oldest university in the United States, was named after Elihu Yale, whose son was David Yale, and Joseph Himman is the ex-husband of Elihu Yale's wife,
and probably the father of the boy who was buried.
No. as per records, it's Elihu Yale's son. So this tomb, I think it was around 16th century. Elihu Yale was in Madras around 16th century or 17th century, sorry. And I think a matter of concern now is that the metro rail is going to, I think, go over this tomb, and that it will not be a so prominent heritage site as it is now. And this is despite the fact that there is Ancient Monuments and Archaeological Site Act that provides that within a radius of 100 meters, there will not be any construction carried out. As in, the authorities have given consent for taking the metro rail project ahead over this tomb. And I think end of the day, when we look at the mappings of different heritage sites, what came out were these interesting stories. Stories of how we connected with the rest of the world, or how we engaged with the rest of the world in the case of the tomb, or about our printing culture, or printing and the history of printing, or end of the day, there's a variety of stories. I think these different sites, the different heritage sites tell us these stories. And yeah, now that is the two sites that I want to talk about. Over to Adra, talk about the rest.
Okay, so because I don't want to get into the history that much because there is a person who is going to talk about it.
No, please don't. I'll see what
The surprise that Sriram was talking about in the beginning of the presentation was King George statue. Actually, about the king, if you want to talk about the King George statue, it was actually not even in the list which Roshan gave us, and we took the picture, and when we saw the state of the state in which it is maintained only, we understood that this is actually a heritage site. Actually, if you just see the picture, you can see that there are posters there, and because the full picture is not there, that's the problem. There is a liquor bottle on the base of the statue.
In the morning there are words.
We found it in the morning.
And some days you'll be holding a flag of DSK or
so the King George statue, it was given as it was presented to the city by the leading Gujarati merchant princess Chaturguja Govindos of the Kushaldos family, the Gujarati family, and the statue is of 45,000 rupees, and it is done by Joseph Nectar. So this was this separate package what Sriram was talking about. Mainly we are highlighting the King George statue here is that it reflects how we are taking care of our heritage right now. Because we have been talking about in our history, we do give importance to our history, but still we are part of that crowd which still neglect our history. So this is one of the sites which we visited during that heritage mapping. Second is the Armenian Street. In Armenian Street, it was walking down memory lane, because these two buildings stood majestically among the buildings. But it was easy to spot the Regal House, which is now being occupied by Dini Limited company. It is compared to King George and other heritage buildings, it has been well maintained. But and it does reflect the past glories of Chennai. Whereas South India House, which was built in 1920, it
completely missed it in the first trial. They were asking people, so where is the king or something else. Two people were pointing on opposite direction. So we had to go two or three times to find out where South India House was. The South India House, earlier it was occupied by offices, and now also it is occupied by South Indian Cooperation Agency. And it was the task of the spotting South India House was tough because it was blending so well with the surrounding buildings. And but still, it was a fun mapping session. And yes, we are going for the second heritage mapping journey tomorrow. And
In May.
no, tomorrow.
Georgetown in May.
Georgetown, yeah. And
I must say, you are braver than what I am.
and we do hope to come across some great packages like King George. Thank you. And these are other morning reforms. Heritage section reforms, sub-registers office, Central Market, and people merchant and Adams Building and Chapter. And
As you can see, we've had a really fun time. They do this every Saturday, and tomorrow they're going. So if any of you want to join, we're going to arm you with a GPS device, and we're going to be shared with the list as well. Something they didn't talk about was, for example, Chaplain's House. These 8 interns split up into 4 groups, and each of the 4 groups was pointed to a different building towards Chaplain House. So when the 4 teams regrouped, they all had identified one Chaplain's House. And so this is the state of our knowledge of heritage buildings, and by people who are working there. I now invite Sriram Venkatakrishnan to talk about Georgetown. Sriram is an historian and the convener of INTACH Chennai chapter. Sriram has passionately tried to promote heritage conservation by speaking and writing about the heritage of Chennai. He has authored several books on the history and heritage of Chennai and Carnatic music, and also conducts heritage walks in different parts of the city, including a night walk to Georgetown. We will be working closely with him to visualize these walks and weave together stories of love, tragedy, and social and political alliances of people who once lived in Chennai. Today we will talk about Blacktown, or Georgetown, as it came to be known in 1911, the oldest part of Chennai. Once the center of the city, Georgetown is a much neglected quarter of the city today, and the ruins of the building still stand testament to the vibrant city from a time long forgotten. The talk will unearth what Chennai 60001 is all about and highlight its current problems.
Good evening, friends. This is the presentation, as Satyarupa said, about the oldest part of the city. But before I begin, let me also qualify that it is not the oldest part of the city, because Mylapore, Tiruvattriyur, Thiruvallikeni, Tirunirmalai, these are all much older than what Georgetown is. Georgetown is, after all, only as old as 1639, whereas Mylapore goes back by almost 2000 years. Tiruvattriyur is supposed to be the oldest spot in the whole world if you believe Hindu mythology. And, St. Thomas Mount, which goes back to the time of St. Thomas. So, those are all much older. But if you look at Chennai as an entity, or Madras as a city, then this is definitely the oldest part, because all the others were amalgamated into this city, starting with Thiruvallikeni, which was the first village that became a part of Chennai. And therefore, this area can rightfully call itself the oldest part of the city as an entity. Go ahead, sorry, I think I should.
Just sure.
Let's put an end to that.
You just say next, I'll move it.
Okay, thanks. Then I think we should do that. I think this light can be right. It also beats the reflection of my head. Hello. So, this was Blacktown. And And let's not forget that for the English we were definitely black. So there was a color, there was a color divide. Where was White Town? White Town was inside Fort St. George, and the town that came up around it was definitely Black Town, and it remained Black Town till 1911. In 1905, King George V, as Prince of Wales, came to Madras city, and then in 1911 he came back to India for the Grand Coronation Darbar, the only time that a reigning monarch had come to India and was crowned here as the Emperor of India in Delhi. He did not come to Chennai at that time. And then a petition was made that because he had come here in 1905, the city ought to change its, the oldest part of the city should change its name from Blacktown to Georgetown. And therefore in 1911 the government gazette published that henceforth this will be known as Georgetown. It was for a long time after that, you will find in all the postal records it will be written as GT. And today we refer to it as town. GT, and then there is PT, which is Park Town, which is where Central Station, Victoria Public Hall and all the other things are. So this was Georgetown, and then you had New Town as well, which is Pudupete, and so on. But this is GT, and that is how it stood. So this statue really commemorates the changing of the name, and the fact that it became Georgetown from Blacktown. And as they said, Govindas, Chaturbujadas of the Kushaldas family, and it's a prominent urinal and a shit pot in the morning. And in the evening, it's a place where all the drunkards assemble. But during the day, it's a flourishing car park. That's why it's always being put to multi-purpose uses. Deep down within me, I'm quite happy that George is treated this way because he never had any love lost for India. So, I wouldn't really quarrel with that. But my request would be that he should remain here and continue, witnessing all these things. That's about the only thing as far as I'm concerned. So our story of Georgetown or Blacktown really begins with the arrival of the British. So in 1639 they came here and then they negotiated for a small piece of land. If you read the records, you'll find that then as now all property transactions involved benami, involved lack of land records, improper documentation, and considerations that were not on the document. So, this real estate transactions have never changed in nature ever since. And then they negotiated for this small piece of land, which they called Fort St. George, and they built a stockade where they began to keep their goods and a few of their officers and their soldiers. Now, who were the soldiers? Soldiers were basically the kind of rejects who become the watchmen today. In the event of an invasion, they will hide for safety first and most of them were rejected by other people and then they had come here and they had taken to the service. And these were the kind of people who were living inside what was called Fort St. George. Immediately outside Fort St. George came up what was called Blacktown. This was meant to provide services to the fort. And it was also known as Gentoo Town because in those days that was the term for the Hindu native. He was known as the Gentoo. And therefore this was also, GT even then, Gentoo Town, and then Blacktown and then Georgetown. Strangely, this Gentoo Town did not include what is today Georgetown. That is the interesting part of the documentation. If you look at the oldest maps of the city made somewhere in 1711 or so, you'll find that the area which is today the High Court is what is really earmarked as Blacktown. And behind that are two flourishing localities called Museyalpeta and Pedanayakampeta. And much later, they become Georgetown or Blacktown. So the original Blacktown or Gentoo Town was where the High Court compound is placed. Incidentally, High Court even now is a pin code all by itself. It is Chennai 104. It is so big as a campus that it occupies a postal district by itself. And secondly, when all the areas surrounding it are Chennai 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, Chennai 11 and all that, where does this come to be Chennai 104? Because the construction of the High Court began only in the 1860s, much after the entire Georgetown area and the rest of, Chennai had already developed. Mylapore, Tiruvallur, Egmore, everything had come up. So, this got a postal district which is much later in time. And that is why it is Chennai 104. So that was the original Blacktown. This, in fact, is really the entrance to Old Blacktown, if you look at it. Where the Law College entrance is today, that would have been roughly the place where people would have gone in and would have gone into this town that we know as Blacktown or Georgetown. Today we have this monument, this gateway to the Law College, and behind that you've got the High Court campus. So when I took this photograph, I was standing roughly at the intersection of NSE Bose Road or China Bazaar Road as it used to be called, along with Broadway or Prakasham Road as it is called today. So it is at this intersection that this photograph was taken. Now why is it called, I am jumping history, but why was Broadway renamed as Prakasham Park? So that's a very interesting story by itself. Tanguturi Prakasham was a very, very famous lawyer of this city. And he was also an active member of the Congress Party. In the 1920s, when the famous Simon Commission came to this city, there was a protest march against the Simon Commission. And the procession came down Broadway and came to this very intersection where the police opened fire on it and killed a man called Pascal. So the body of Pascal was thrown into the intersection which you see over here. And then an announcement was made that nobody should come forward and claim the body. If they do, they would meet with the same fate as Pascal. It was Prakasham who removed his shirt, ran forward and hugged the body and threatened the police or dared the police to do what they wanted to do. And they lost their guts at that point of time and appealed to the crowd to disperse peacefully. And then the meeting ended with that. Prakasham later became the first premier of Madras presidency after independence. Later he also became the first chief minister of Andhra Pradesh when that state was founded. And his statue, incidentally, is straight down this road. If from Broadway or Prakasham Road, if you go down towards what is called Raja Annamalai Mandram, you will find his statue at the intersection, looking at the spot where, he once picked up the body of the dead man, Pascal. So it's a very moving story, and when you stand there and say, or when you listen to this story, that thrill goes through your entire brain, This independence, it was fought and it was won on the basis of sacrifices like that made by people like that Parsarthi or whom we know nothing, or Prakasham who was ready to give up his life at a moment's notice. He would have had children. He must have had an aged mother or a father or somebody to take care of. He was not thinking of all that. He just jumped ahead and went and did what he thought was right on that occasion. Fort St. George, as you know, if you looked at the first slide, there is that flag mast which was shown. That really was the tallest, continues to remain the tallest flag mast in the entire country. And originally made of wood and survived as a wooden flag mast till around 20 years ago when unfortunately it was decided that a wooden flag mast was weakening and therefore a concrete flag post had to be erected in its place. So the flag mast was brought down, and then because there was not enough space to store it, it was cut into several pieces and then abandoned. And then the concrete flag post was put up. Nobody realized that the weight of the concrete flag post is much more than that of a wooden flag post. And therefore the entire bastion of Fort St. George began to move forward under the weight of the concrete flag post. And today they are doing their level best to protect it from crumbling. So what did not fall over 300 years had to fall, would almost fall down because of a concrete flag post that came up there. But the man who really brought that flag post and put it up was this notorious Elihu Yale. It was during his time that a ship foundered on the seashore and the flag post was picked up and brought here, and then he put it up. He was governor at that time of the fort and got the flag to fly. Now, Yale, this Yale monument, and then the inside, the skull and the crossbones that is inscribed inside the Yale monument. Yale came here as a bachelor and then, fell in love with Catherine Hinmer, who was the wife of his friend Joseph Hinmer, who conveniently died, and then gave Catherine in marriage, obviously, to Yale. And Yale and Hinmer's marriage is the first marriage to be recorded in St. Mary's in the Fort. And Yale did not end with that. His libido was obviously something exceptional. Because there was a woman called Catherine Barker. In those days, women who did not get married in England would be shipped off to India. Because here there were these frustrated whiteskins who were waiting, and any woman would get married here on arrival. So they were known as the fishing fleet, because they came here fishing for a husband. Now this Catherine Barker was rejected even by the locals. The English, none of them wanted to marry her. But Yale saw great potential in Catherine Barker, And he got her married off to his close friend, Nicks, N-I-C-K-S. And then Catherine Barker became Catherine Nicks. And she became a guest in the house of Yale. So you had Catherine Hinmer, you had Catherine Barker or Catherine Nicks also living there. She was the first woman entrepreneur of Madras. Because in those days, as you know, I wouldn't say it, but in those days, everybody made a commission on everything, including the governor. From Veselaka, which is Vesele, to, cloth that was being shipped out, the governor had a cut. And Mrs. Nicks, because she was a close friend of the governor, also got a cut. So she was the first woman to have invoices made in her name in this city, and a letterhead as well, on which she would issue receipts for the commissions that she received. So obviously she was a front for Yale, and she lived in this house as well. Then came Hieronima de Paiva, whose husband was a diamond merchant living on Armenian Street, because that was where all the Armenian Jews and the Armenian Christians lived. The Armenian Christians lived on Armenian Street, Armenian Jews lived on Coral Merchant Street, which is the parallel street. And de Paiva was the leader of the diamond trade, bringing diamonds from Golconda and then exporting them. When he died, Hieronima became Elihu Yale's woman as well. And she taught him the secrets of the diamond trade, and his fortune multiplied and multiplied and multiplied. Then, soon came to a level where the company in England became very jealous of his wealth and decided to post a commission of inquiry. So he stayed on here in Madras, answered the commission of inquiry happily, and when he left, I don't know whether he went with Hieronima and Barker and everybody, but the original wife, Hinmer, died in Cape of Good Hope, which is where she is buried. Then he went back to England, of course, and then this college came down from America, because Yale was born in New Haven, Connecticut. And then they said that we are building a college here, which we would like you to make a contribution. He gave some paintings and rugs and books, which were auctioned off, and 500 pounds was netted out of that, and that is how Yale University really started. So this Yale son is buried here, and the skull and crossbones that you see here, incidentally, in Yale University you have a skull and crossbones society. Whether it has any connection with what is put up over here, I have no clue. But this is his son's tomb, which is standing inside the law college campus. Why is it inside the law college? As I told you, old Blacktown was here. And this spot was the burial ground for all the English who died in Fort St. George. So when they died there, their body would be brought here and it would be buried in this area, which became the law college. The High Court side was obviously the town, the Black Town, and this side was the burial ground. It was a guava garden. It was also known as Company Garden or Guava Garden. And this is where the burials used to take place. Now, when the city expanded, this obviously closed because, the space here was limited, and then they began to use the area which is near the central station today. When you go over the old Stanley Viaduct, if you look down, you'll find 3 burial grounds over there. So that was the second set of burial grounds that they were using. When the French invaded Madras in 1746, they used these areas as cover for bombarding the city as well as the fort. So when the English came back in 1749, they realized that this was a security risk. And therefore, they decided to abandon this Guava Garden and this Blacktown. They ordered the demolition of Blacktown. And this burial ground also, all the tombstones that were here were shifted into Fort St. George, where they lie outside St. Mary's Church. Some of the bigger ones were left here. And this obviously was the biggest. And this has continued to remain here. Next to it used to be another one called the Pawnee Vault. Pawnee is remembered because he had 14 legitimate children in Madras, which was a bit of a miracle in those days. In fact, the company records say Merchant Pawnee leaving behind 14 legitimate children. That is what is written about him. Now, several of them were buried in the Pawnee Vault. What happened to the Pawnee Vault is now the biggest mystery. Till around 20 years ago, people have all seen this Pawnee Vault. Whereas ever since I have started visiting the area, I have seen no trace of this Pawnee Vault. I have been asking where did it stand, all kinds of vague answers I get. It used to have a minaret, it used to have a mandapam-like structure. Obviously, it stood just next to Yale Monument. There is no trace of it. When did it get demolished? How did it vanish? This is how archaeological survey monuments are taken care of. You said they are lucky that they survived. Well, that was an instance of how these things survive. Now, inside the fort, you've got the Fort Museum, which is today one of the good museums of the city, though that's not saying much. If you go visit the International Museum and then come here, most of them are horrors, absolute horrors. But this is commercially a very important building because this is where business as we know of it today really began. In the 1760s, when the merchants of the East India Company used to meet in this building, and this is where in the room that you see in the middle, you know, the little Mangalore roof that you see, that used to be what was called the exchange room. And this is where over cups of coffee and glasses of Madeira, they used to negotiate terms for, sale of commodities and things like that. The first lighthouse of the city came up on the roof of this building. And from here, smoke signals used to be sent to the ships that would be in the harbor. The prices of the commodities would then be traded on that basis, also using theodolites and things like that. And that is how business was first conducted here. Then in 1798, Edward, second Lord Clive, he became the governor of Madras, and he said that the fort is no longer meant for business. And he evicted all the businessmen from here. He also evicted the customs house from this place and said, customs is after all bringing in goods which are involved in business. So let them operate from outside. And that is how it shifted to what is today known as First Line Beach, and where customs house still stands. And once that happened, this became a military headquarters. The reason I am bringing this up is that this had very much to do with the flourishing of Georgetown. Let's go to the next slide. When these businessmen began to do business, they did not know the local language. They knew only English. And what was the main business for which they had come here? They were not interested in, diamonds, or they were not interested in the spices which they would have anyway got from Indonesia and other things. The reason they came to Madras was for cloth. The technology of weaving 9 yards and 14 yards and 6 yards and above was something that was considered to be a bit of a miracle as far as the Western world was concerned. And weaving cotton in that kind of yardage was something that was completely unheard of. And then what was called grey cloth, which was undyed cloth, and then blue cloth, which was dyed with indigo, cotton of varying thicknesses. These were all the products that were really being exported from Madras city. Even today, as you know, in the West Indies, the term Madras refers to a thick cloth. So that really originates from here. Now the cloth used to be woven in the hinterland in places like Kanjipuram, Arcot, and other places. Now these people had to go there and get the cloth. So what they would do, they would go and place money with the weavers and negotiate for a particular volume of cloth to be delivered by a particular time, by which time a ship would be leaving from here, and then the cloth would be delivered. There would be a quality of inspection. There would be a QI department, or whatever you call it today, a quality department like we have in factories today. They had it inside the fort, where they would look for the fineness of the cloth, the number of knots that come into every square inch of the cloth. The cloth would then get graded, the value would then be fixed, and then it would be exported from here. The problem was the Indian trader then as now was not the most reliable of people. So the gold would be taken away, and then the cloth would never come. So many a time the East India Company was in a financial embarrassment because gold was being brought and then was being handed out, and then there was no sign of the cloth. So what do? You begin to employ agents. And these agents would know two languages. They would know English and they would know the local language, which incidentally was not Tamil but was more Telugu. Because this is actually, if you look at it, this is almost the northern tip of Tamil Nadu, and next is Telugu land. So most of the language here was Telugu, and these were the Dubashis, or the men who knew two languages, Dvibhashi, and from there the Dubashis. Even today in Chennai we use the word Dubakur as a fraudulent term. This comes entirely from the Dubashis because they were notorious for that kind of business. These were men who knew that neither the buyer nor the seller knew the language of the other party. And therefore, they could fix the terms that they felt like fixing. And the difference between these two was entirely their money. And they became enormously wealthy people. They practically controlled the East India Company, in a way. The only problem was that they were not having the kind of team spirit that the British had. Every Dubash was an individual. He operated for his own benefit. The moment he died, his entire family would collapse because nobody knew where he was getting the money from till then. What was the nature of the transaction? No bookkeeping, nothing. Several times the East India Company also collapsed along with it, or at least the Madras branch of it. There was the notorious Kasi Veeranna, of whom there is no monument today in town, but any businessman worth his salt should first pray to Kasi Veeranna before beginning business any day in the morning. For the Indians, he was Kasi Veeranna. For the Hindus, for the Muslims, he was Hasan Khan. And for the Christians, he was Casa Verona, signing under 3 different names. He was the second Dubash, effectively, the first one being Berry Timanna, who founded the city, along with Andrew Coburn and Francis King. After Berry Timanna came Kasi Veeranna. And Kasi Veeranna came here with nothing. By the time he died, he had owned godowns, bank stalls, gardens, houses, you name it, everything was Kasi Veeranna property. And for some time, the East India Company formed a joint stock company along with Kasi Veeranna. So effectively, he was a kind of partner with the East India Company, so that he would be able to get the cloth from all these weavers and supply it to them. And how did he do it? He had a set of agents. There was Muddu Veeranna, who was his grandson. There was Alangata Pillai, remembered in Triplicane in Alangata Pillai Street. There was Tambu Chetty, who was remembered in Tambu Chetty Street. These were all his powerful number 2s. And they would go and terrorize the countryside and get hold of the cloth and bring it and deliver it on time. And when Veeranna died, chaos. Après moi le deluge, as Louis XIV said, or 14th was it. After him, nothing. So it took 20 years for the East India Company to recover from Kasi Veeranna's mess. So that was the time. And when he died, the legend goes, Muslims came to bury him, and his wife had to show her tali and say he's a Hindu, he has to be cremated. He built a mosque on Moore Street, incidentally. The mosque is no longer there, but he built a mosque on Moore Street. This was the kind of notoriety that these Mubashir had. And when Jeremy, I forget his name now, there was this finance member of the East India Company when he was going back to England, Jeremy Sambrook. Kasi Veeranna sends him a jar of along with him. By the time Sambrook goes back to London, Veeranna is dead. And then a letter comes back from the East India Company, we need 5 more jars of the pictures of the same quality that Veeranna had given Sambrook. Whatever Veeranna did turned into gold, as long as Veeranna was alive. So you have some of these temples. When a man becomes rich beyond measure, what does he do? He starts doing good deeds. That is what he did. Veeranna built a mosque. The other Dubashis began building. Now, the first temple of what is called Georgetown stood where the High Court is today. That was known as the Black Pagoda. It was also known as the Chennai Perumal Temple. And Nagabhattran, the gunpowder maker, and Berry Timannan, who was the first Dubash, the 2 Indians who effectively founded the city along with Andrew Coburn and Francis King. The first endowments to that temple were made by Timanna and Nagabhattran. In fact, there are records which say that on this particular day, I, Berry Timanna, have given this money to the Chennai Perumal Temple, and I have endowed it with so much of cows and things like that, meant for this worship, that worship, etc. in 1640. So this temple, at that time only Chennai Perumal Temple, stood in where the High Court is today. So it must have been obviously in the middle of that old black town. Then what happened, as I told you, between 1746 and 49, the French occupied the city. If they had stayed on, this presentation would have been in French. It would have been in English. But then in 1749, you had the Treaty of Aix-la-Chapelle in Europe, and Quebec, the entire province of Quebec was returned to the French, and the tiny town of Madras was returned to the British. So that was the value that Madras had to the English, that they were willing to trade an entire province in Canada and get back this tiny little town in exchange. And when they came back, as I said, they realized that this guava garden and this black town is a security risk because these French are going to come and bombard us from here. And therefore, they decided to raise the entire thing to them. And when they began raising it to the ground, they had to demolish the Chennai market. Therefore, they said, we will give you alternate land within the town, within Pedanayakanpete and Muttayalpete, which now will become Black Town, effectively, because that part of town which stood near the fort has gone. And therefore, they gave it place near Devarajamundi Street and said the same quantity of land that you originally occupied for your temple, we are giving it to you over here, and you can start building your temple. Now, as always, the idea was that let somebody else do it. So the temple was not being built for some time. And then you had the last powerful chief merchant of the East India Company, a Dubash called Manali Muthukrishnan. Manali Muthukrishna Mudali was the Dubash to Governor George Piggott. Piggott was so corrupt that finally he was killed by his own council members. The only instance of a governor of Madras being murdered is that of George Piggott. And Piggott's Dubash was Manali Muthukrishna Mudali. And he came forward in the 1760s and said he would put the first seed money for building this temple. The East India Company gave money equal to the value that Manali Muthukrishna Mudali had given. Then public subscription came in and construction continued up to 1780, and finally you have the Chennai Perumal where it is today. When this temple was rebuilt, they decided they will have a temple for Shiva as well next to it. And therefore Chennai Malleshwara Swami temple came up. And therefore these two stand as twin temples even now. They have separate entrances to go in, but if you are in one temple, you can go through a passageway and get into the other temple. Effectively, these were called the Patnam temples because they defined the existence of Madras. Because when this city was founded, this temple also was founded along with it. Did the term Chennai have anything to do with Chennai? I am not the person qualified to answer that. But because it was located in the High Court complex and later moved, and because it is really the oldest temple if you look at Madras as an entity, for a very long time in the High Court, it was the practice that when a person had to take the oath, that Gita ke kasam, main sach aur bilkul sach ke siwaye, that statement, if it was an Iyer or a Saivite, they would do it on the vibhuti of the Chennai Malleshwara Swami. And if it was a Vaishnavite, they would do it on the Tulasi of the Chennai Swami. This was the High Court tradition till around 75 years ago. I don't think that tradition continues today. But this was built by Manali Muthukrishna. As I told you, they demolished that old part of Blacktown. They did not want any further construction to happen there because that had to be maintained as an open area so that gunfire could be answered back from the fort without any damage to the city that was behind. So all along that area, they put up 15 granite pillars, saying that this is the boundary of Madras. You cannot build beyond it. So a huge 400-yard distance separated Fort St. George from Blacktown. Over a period of time, a road came up, and that would become China Bazaar Road or NSC Bose Road. Of those 15 pillars, only one pillar still survived. That is outside their house in Paris Corner. It still says the boundary of Madras, 1772. And another pillar was discovered just 10 years ago in the corner of Broadway and China Bazaar Road. Before the archaeological survey could be indicated, the owner got nervous and demolished it. He didn't want a historic monument in his premises. So that is how that pillar ended. But this pillar is still being maintained by Parry and Company. By 1800, with Tipu Sultan being dead and the French being finished, the threat of any invasion to Madras completely ceased. And therefore, they began allowing construction along that road. And that is how China Bazaar Road or NSC Bose Road really came up. Much later, of course, the High Court came up with the opposite thing. So this, in effect, is Georgetown today. So you've got, that is Fort St. George on that side. And then you have got, on one side, you've got First Line Beach, which is along the sea coast. And you've got the Chennai port over here today. So this is First Line Beach. On this side, you've got Old Jail Road. And then that side, you've got Waltax Road. And in the front, you've got China Bazaar or NSC Bose Road. This really defines the original dimensions of what is Georgetown. Now, today you have a Marina Beach, where everybody goes when it gets very hot in summer. Georgetown had its own Marina Beach too, which was here. Till 1800 or 1855, this used to really be the Marina Beach for the city. All the residents of Georgetown would come down here and spend their evening on this sea coast over here and relax, because this was where the sea practically, why was this known as Paris Corner? Because in high tide the sea would come right up to this point. It would practically lap the walls of their house. So there was nothing beyond this. There was no port. There was all that was to come much later. So till 1855, this used to be the place where entire Fort Georgetown would come to relax. So that is one reason why you find all the streets point in this direction. They are all here because ventilation used to come from here. The sea breeze used to flow into this city in this direction. Then you've got roads on the other side because your principal business is with Fort St. George. You don't have any other business. There's no other reason for the existence of this town. So they formed a complete grid pattern. That is how this town was entirely developed. The town did not have any drainage facilities. It was a stinking cesspit till a woman called Florence Nightingale in London, the famous Florence Nightingale, got to know about the dreadful drainage conditions in Madras and began a campaign there in London. Finally, funds were sanctioned. And if at all we have a Saturday today, we have to thank Florence Nightingale. It's amazing when you read the life of Florence Nightingale. She invites officers from Madras to come live in her house so that she can give them lectures on how a drainage is needed in this. In fact, one of my forthcoming articles is on how she became very friendly with one particular officer in the city. How the two of them together really fathered and mothered the drainage system for this town. So anyway, so this is how town really got structured. Next slide. Now, okay, the French had vanished in 1749, but shortly after that came the terrifying presence of Mr. Hyder Ali and his son Tipu Sultan. Now they could come right up to the gates of Fort St. George and threaten it, and nothing could prevent anybody. So then it was decided, but before the arrival of Hyder Ali and Tipu Sultan, it was decided that we'll have to protect Georgetown with a wall. And therefore, this really became a walled city. Today, there is a very small stretch of that wall still left. But originally, it was decided, if you could go back to the earlier slide, this, they decided, did not need a wall because the sea formed a natural barrier here. So then they said that this stretch will have to have a wall. So it will have to close up to the general hospital. After which they assumed that Fort St. George by itself would take care of the protection. So up to that point, where you see General Hospital marked, they decided to have a wall built. And the construction began sometime in the 1770s. The man who wrote down the specifications for the wall, Government PWD Department, East India Company, wrote it in such a fashion that nobody except he himself could bid successfully for the contract. And therefore, when the contract was awarded to him, he resigned his job and became a contractor. That was Paul Benfield, one of the most corrupt monsters of old Madras. But the British had to thank him because in a very indirect way, Benfield was responsible for the whole of India becoming a British empire, British colony. So, Benfield really was terrible. But anyway, Benfield began the construction of the wall. And the work began, and it started off from the intersection of Rajaji Saleh, went down what is Old Jail Road, and then it came up to the entrance of what is called Waltax Road, and there they hit upon the idea that they should charge a tax on the residents of the city for building a protective wall for their own benefit. Now this was hotly disputed because then as now we were not happy paying taxes. We did not want to pay any tax, no parking fee. Even today when your entrance man charged me $20, my first reaction was, why should I pay? Then I realized, look, he's giving you space, you better pay. So I had to argue within myself for a couple of minutes before I could fork out that kind of money. So this is our average mentality. Why should I pay a bus ticket? Why should I pay a train ticket? Why should I pay my electricity charges? So this is exactly what happened. Then there was a spirited public protest, and then a lawyer of those days, in the 1700s, he said that charging a tax for protecting the people is tantamount to harassing the people and extorting money from the common man. Therefore, the matter went up to the British Parliament where it was upheld. They said, yes, protection money is a form of extortion, and therefore you cannot charge money for building the wall. So the wall was finally built with government money, but the name wall tax came essentially because the tax was going to be charged for building the walls over there. So in its time, it had around 7 gates, if I am not mistaken, and 13 bastions. For a long time, I don't know, you're all very young, I don't think you were even born in 1980. Who was born before 1980? You were born. So, I don't know if those of you remember, but in 1985-86, if you went down Rajaji Saleh, you could see Clive's Battery, Abercrombie Battery. These were all the walls that used to stand on the port side of the Rajaji Saleh. These were all the remnants of the old walls. That is from where guns used to be positioned into the sea to protect the city. And then they were all demolished once the port expansion began. Today, a very small stretch of this wall still remains on Old Jail Road. And the top of the wall is so big that it has been converted into a park. It's called Madi Punga. Because Madi Mela is a Punga. So you climb up these steps, you go up there, it's a lovely patch of green. You can walk there and you can relax and come back. And opposite this Madi Punga is still a road called North Wall Street, and there is Barrack Street, because this was all meant for the protection, and the 7 gates stood roughly one face the sea, and that was called the Waters Gate. Then you had in one gate in front of Samajati Street that was called the Puli Gate. Once in front of Main Street was called Tiruvutturiyur Gate. Elephant Gate in Saukapet even today is commemorative of one of the gates that stood there. Chuckler's Gate used to be there. Then Hospital Gate, which faced the General Hospital. These were the various gates that stood all around the city wall. By the 1820s or 1830s, they realized that the wall is of no use any longer, and they had it demolished. Next slide. Now, business in town. I told you about the Dubashi. So, Manali Muthukrishna Mudali's house used to be here till 10 years ago. This used to be known as Manali Palace. This used to be on Govinda Panayak Street. So, you entered it through this archway, and then you had that building with windows and all that. Then the family that owns it, that is the Manali family, they demolished it to build a car park over there. And then now it's become a commercial building once again. What is on the opposite side, that's on this side of the gate, is the Manali Hostel. Manali Hostel is a place where poor students can come and live and educate themselves in this city. And they are also fed free of cost. This has a platform in the middle. And there used to be a story for a long time that a secret passage extended from here all the way up to Manali Muthukrishna Mudaliar's house in Manali, New Town. But I don't know about that. But the platform itself used to be called the Vasanta Mandapam, because during the spring festival, Chennai Perumal used to be brought here in procession and entertained with song and dance. Now that procession has stopped because the congestion on the street has become terrible. But Manali Hostel is still worth a visit. It's a very nice heritage building. Then you had Pachepa Mudaliar, who is remembered today for his great act of philanthropy. Pachepa lived a very short life. He was alive only for 45 years or so, dying in the 1790s of paralysis. But you can see that even his statue is not devoid of posters. But incidentally, nobody knows how Pachepa Mudaliar looked. This is just an artist's impression of him blessing a young child. We don't really have any portrait or anything of him. But when Pachepa Mudaliar died, he incidentally lived in a place which is called Land Garden Road. How many of you are familiar with that? Coombe River and Harris Road and Old Chitra Top. That next to that, there is still a street called Vallal Pachepa Mudaliar Street, and in that corner is where he lived. It is said that he used to have a bath every day in the Coombe. Whether he died because of that, I don't know. But in his time, I'm sure the Coombe River must have been a very clean river. Pachepa Mudaliar died in the 1790s, and having left a very small portion of his money to his daughter, the rest of it, he said, is to be used for good deeds. Now, what was the interpretation of good deeds kept people busy for 50 years? The uncles and his nephews and all thought that good deeds meant to keep them in comfort. But then the government had other views, and there was a lawyer called George Norton, the famous Norton, after whom Norton Gardens in Mandavati is named. He was the man who first came up with the interpretation that education is the good deed that can be safely interpreted from the will, and therefore the money can be used for education. So the entire Pachepa's trust was set up with representatives of the High Court and others on it, as it is even today. Even today, judges of the High Court form a part of the trusteeship of the Pachepa's trust. And then the institutions were all started somewhere in the 1840s. And to start and to give an impressive home to the Pachepa school that was going to come up, they built this building which even today dominates NSC Bose Road or China Bazaar Road. Built completely inspired by Greek architecture after the temple of Athena. This is a wonderful building if you can go inside and see. And anybody can go in and see it because it's just kept open most of the time. In fact, it's entirely commercialized surrounding it, and then there is a school which is in the back portion. The front portion has got this hall, Pachepa's hall, where everybody up to Annadurai has spoken. It's really, if you look at it, Dravidian history, modern Dravidian history, can be written by just going to this hall and making a study of it. Annadurai studied in this school, And he also hoped in this place after he had become a celebrity. And the condition in which it is maintained today just shows how much respect we give even for contemporary history. Forget British history and other things. The man who redefined Dravidian philosophy and gave South India an identity, if you look at it in many ways. This is where he really was educated. This is where he really spoke and attracted millions. That hall is still standing as it was in his time, but kept in a very poor fashion. And this is interestingly also one of the first places where steel made in Chennai was used in construction. Till that time, steel would always be imported. It would come in. But Gopal Nayakar and Sons, which was a company that was started somewhere in the 1840s near Cochrane's Basin Road, they supplied the steel for the construction of for holding up the rafters and all that. If you go there, you can still see their name stamped on the steel bars that hold up the roof. Remarkable ventilation, and when you stand there, you don't need a fan, you don't need air conditioning, you don't need any lighting, except if you go there late in the day. And it is said in British records that in the 1850s, after Chepauk Palace, this was the second most impressive building that you saw when you were coming by sea into this city. Then the British business. So you had the Dubashis, you also had the British businesses. This is Parry's Corner. Parry and Company, incidentally, is the second oldest registered surviving company in India. The first one being Forbes and Company in Bombay, which belongs to the Tatas. This was registered in 1798 as Parry and Company by Thomas Parry, who came down here, and of course, in the beginning years, indulged in all the usual nefarious activities that a good British writer would do in this city, and then made his fortune and started this company. He tried his hand at leather, he tried his hand at sugar, he tried his hand at several things, and then his partner Dare took over the business, which is why Parry's Corner and Dare House is named after the second partner of the company. By 1800, this property had been identified by Thomas Parry and had been purchased. So it is effectively a witness to 212 years of commercial activity and of business. And if you get permission and go in, they have maintained the minute books from the time of Parry. You can see Parry's handwriting. You can see how business was conducted there. And of course, this building does not date to that time. It was an Indo-Saracenic building that stood here. Then in 1938, that building was demolished, and then this Art Deco structure came out. And Parry, in many ways, was the founding of the commercial fortunes of this city. Because Parry came, and after Parry came, next slide, please, Binney. If Parry came in 1798, Binney came in 1801. Thomas Binney, or I forget what was his first name, Deaf Binney as he used to be called, because he was deaf. He came here with nothing except a recommendation to the Nawab of Arcot that he could be of some use. And the Nawab of Arcot made him the surgeon to the Nawab. He was not a qualified doctor. And his biographer says, we don't know how many people he killed while he was in the Nawab's service. Parry also was in the Nawab's service for some time. That's how the Nawab effectively ruined himself. And when they all broke away from the Nawab, when he had become financially insolvent, they all started business. And Binney, Parry, they all started trading. They would take goods from here, put them on ships, send them there, import things, sell them. Piece goods was really the business that slowly began to transform the fortunes of these companies. The irony of it is that till 1800, we were weaving the cloth, we were sending cloth from here, we were getting gold. Then by 1800, the Industrial Revolution had completely transformed the way cloth was woven. Machines had come there. Cotton was being exported from here. Woven cloth was being brought from there. India was paying money for the import of woven cloth. And these people had transformed their business. They began to import cloth. They were also into slave trade for some time. They were sending slaves from here to South Africa, to Fiji, and other places. So that also was part of their thing. They were into indigo trade. Of course, unlike the famous Bombay Parsis, they were not into opium trading. So we must give them credit. That's because no opium was grown in this area. So we could leave it at that. Binney came up here. And then after Binney came a third company called Arbuthnot. A, B, and C. These were the three that really defined Madras business. Arbuthnot, Binney, and Parry. So the order in which they came was Parry, Binney, and Arbuthnot. So today Binney is still remembered in this building. Our Parry is flourishing. Where is Arbuthnot? So Arbuthnot came a good 30 years after Parry and Binney. And there was no stopping them. They were the best business house. They were the fastest growing business house in the city. Arbuthnauts were so famous in the city that, you could change the city to Arbuthnot Patnam if you wanted to. There were Arbuthnauts in everything. There was a chief secretary who was an Arbuthnot. There was prominent business people. The Duke of Wellington's girlfriend was a Mrs. Arbuthnot in London. She came from the same Arbuthnot family. Between the three, A, B and C, they founded the Madras Chamber of Commerce, which is today 175 years old. And then came several other businesses like Gordon Woodruff, Beardself. These were all the old Madras names in business. And then in 1906, the whole Arbuthnot empire vanished. It became financially insolvent. The partner of Arbuthnot and Company in London committed suicide by throwing himself in front of the train at the Victoria station. And then in October 1906, or was it December, I don't remember now, poster was put up outside that this organization is now insolvent. Thousands in Madras residency lost their money. From Raja Ravi Verma's family, he had died just a couple of years earlier, to St. Peter's College in Tanjavur, institutions, individuals, there were private suicides, people they were ruined overnight when Arbuthnot crashed. And when Arbuthnot crashed, a group of Indians got together and said, and foreign banks have let us down, we will start an Indian bank. And that is how in 1908, Indian Bank was formed. As out of the ashes of Arbuthnot and Company came Indian Bank. And ironically, Indian Bank was to buy Arbuthnot's property on First Line B and make it its own headquarters. And then, of course, much later they demolished it and built their multi-story building which still stands on Raja Ravi. So these were Binny, Arbuthnot and Parry. And slowly, these companies began to dominate what was called First Line B, or Raja Nisale as we know of it today. Parry started it by building in the corner. Then Arbuthnot Binny built a little behind on Armenian Street. Gordon Woodruff built further down Raja Nisale. Banks started coming over here. You had the Mercantile Bank, which is today the Hong Kong and Shanghai Banking Corporation building. And then you had some other buildings which have vanished. Greenleaf Bank, Standard Chartered Bank, which is still there today, but the building has gone. They came here. Best and Company, which brought kerosene oil into the city for the first time. These are all companies that formed their headquarters along Raja. And slowly they began to demand better amenities. In 1760s, a postal service had started inside Fort St. George. First time they wrote, people should pay for the letters that they post. And that is how post office was established inside Fort St. George. These companies began to demand, saying that you cannot have a post office inside a fort. You will have to bring it out. And therefore, the second post offices were established in Deperi and Royapeta. Then they said the head post office cannot be inside Fort St. George, shifted. So it came into town. You still have a post office street inside Georgetown. That is where it stood. And then in the 1880s, they got this magnificent building built for housing the post office. In 1884, foundation stone was laid. Robert Fellowes Chisholm, as Roshan just now mentioned some time ago, he designed this structure and then it was built. And till today, it's a magnificent post office, head post office for the city, thanks entirely to all these business houses that came up on one side of Georgetown. What about the Dubashes? Now, with the East India Company going away, the power of the Dubash reduced considerably. They ceased to be the corrupt monsters that they were. They became more responsible individuals. But till 1947, it was customary for all British houses to have a Dubash. And he would get a percentage of the profit of the company. He would arrange for money. He would arrange for negotiations. So it was effectively an agency, was called a Dubash. Binny had a Dubash. Western Crompton had a Dubash. Several of them. One of the most famous Dubashes was Raja Sir Savale Ramaswamy Mudaliar, whose portrait you see over there. He built the first hospital in Georgetown for Indians. It is called the Raja Sir Savale Ramaswamy Mudaliar Lying in Hospital. It is next to Stanley's Hospital. And it is in Roypuram, effectively. It is not in Georgetown, it is just outside. He became the first Indian to become the Sheriff of Madras in 1880. Given the title of Raja, given the title of Sir, and opposite Central Station, when you stand facing the road, you'll find a beautiful building with domes and all that on the opposite side. This next to the gate. That's called the Raja Sir Savale Ramaswamy Mudaliar Saultry. He built a guest house for people to come and stay. It's worth a visit, going there and taking a look at that building. Then came the Perumal Chetty family. All of us grew up on pencils by Perumal Chetty and Sons. You know, Ajanta pencils and then the other, I forget the other names and all that. They were all produced by Ho and Company used to be one of their, they were very big Subhashis at that time. Stringer Street, this used to be the headquarters of Ho and Company, but this is no longer there. But the Perumal Chetty head office, I saw it in one of the photographs that you had put up. And Ramnath Goenka, the founder of Indian Express, he came here and he was a Dubash too. So they were all Dubashis till 1947. That kind of business continued for a very long time. And then the business houses, Indian and English, got together and got the Bank of Madras building. Bank of Madras is really the oldest bank in the country. It started as the Madras Bank inside Fort St. George. Then it became the Bank of Madras. Till the 1920s, this was the Presidency Bank. It had the right to issue its own currency for Madras Presidency. So you had a Bengal Bank, you had a Bombay Bank, and you had a Madras Bank. And this was their headquarters. Immediately after the First World War, all the three banks were merged together and they became the Imperial Bank of India, which after independence became the State Bank of India. And therefore, this is today the State Bank's headquarters. But if you go inside, you will still find the glass ventilator saying BMBM, Bank of Madras. That is the original name and that is still seen there. Henry Irving was the architect and the man who built it was Tatikonda Nambermal Chetty, who was the biggest contractor from 1880s till 1920s or so. A man who became so fabulously rich that he owned almost the whole of Harrington Road and Tedpet and Upper Tank and all that. At one time, he had 99 houses in that area. He refused to buy the 100th house because he said it would bring him bad luck. And there was a story for a long time that because Tatikonda Nambermal Chetty owned the area, it became Chettipettai and not Chetty. So that's not true. And the house where he lived is still there on McNichol's Road. It's called Sriram. And Nambermal Chetty is remembered today more because he practically adopted the mathematician Srinivasa Ramanujan as his son. When Ramanujan came back from England completely sick and dying, Nambermal Chetty said that no, you can't go and live in Triplicane and all that and expect your health to improve. Come and live with me. And took care of him till the day he died. And Ramanujan came and lived with Nambermal Chetty and the first thing he said was, your house is called Sriram. You know, I'm already a dying man. How can I live in a house which has cry in it? And therefore, Nambermal Chetty had 99 houses. So he said, next one is called Gometra. Go there and stay. In India, you know, Gometra is actually a Welsh village. But he said in India, in Sanskrit, you can translate it to Gomitra, the friend of the cow. So go there and live and be happy. So Ramanujan lived there and finally he said, Chatti Putin is Tedpet Lagondu in my life is ending. This is documented by Robert Cannical beautifully in his biography, The Man Who Knew His. And that is where Ramanujan died in Gometra. Gometra is not there anymore, but Crinant is still there. Several of Chennai's buildings there, at one time they used to say, Enda Sevapu Kattadama Irundalo, Adu Nambermal Chetty Kattadam. That was, and his sons-in-law were very famous too. Puratarvar Chetty, who became the founding partner of Perumal Chetty and Son. And the other man, C.C. Krishnaswamy Chetty, who was a brother of Puratarvar Chetty, he brought radio for the first time into India. He founded the Madras Presidency Radio Club in 1924. From that came the Corporation Radio and then came the All India Radio. So this is effectively Nambermal Chetty's sons-in-law who, you know, give us that credit as well. Places of worship and educational institutions in town. Kalikambal Temple, very well known because in the 17th century, Chhatrapati Shivaji Maharaj of Maharashtra came and worshipped in this particular shrine. Shivaji's, shall we call him half-brother, that's the polite and the politically correct term. Half-brother had come and he was the ruler of Tanjavur, Ekoji. And Shivaji did not like his half-brother. So he had decided to invade. So he was coming down all the way from Bombay. And he had reached the borders of Madras and Sriram Master, who was the governor of Madras, had known the terror that Shivaji was in Surat because he had been in Surat when Shivaji had sacked Surat. So he warned the East India Company saying that this is no ordinary king. We are going to be in for great trouble. And let's prepare ourselves for it. So Shivaji came and parked himself in Punamalli, sent a letter saying that I want to have some medicine. So then and he said, I'll pay for it. So they replied saying, how can we take money from you? Take the medicine and go. So he took the medicine. Next week, another letter, more medicine being sent from here. You can see them all holding their breath, what is he going to do next? Then he asked for engineer. There they said, no, we can't send anybody, we are very, very sorry, but it's something that we can't do, you shouldn't mind us, etc., etc. Then they waited with bated breath, but he didn't. He went further, a little along to Tanjavur, suddenly he fell ill and for mysterious reasons he went back without attacking Madras. But then they got to know that one night, without telling anybody, he had come into the city and he had worshipped at the Kalika. So there is a plaque which even now commemorates his visit over there. And which entrance would he have taken? See, today, if you go to Kalika temple, those of you who visited, did any of you go there? Okay. Which road do you take to go into Kalika temple?
I usually go.
Singhi Chetty or Sambu Chetty, one of the two. Ironically, this I got to know only last week, that is not the original entrance. Because this first time when I went this time, I suddenly asked, why is it that you can't see the deity from the road? Because this is a traditional temple, you see the rear of the deity. So then we went the other way, we found the old Gopuram in Armenian Street. And then I asked, they didn't have a convincing answer as to why they built the new entrance. They said this entrance is around 40, 50 years old. Sambu Chetty Street, but the old entrance that Shivaji must have come by would have definitely been on Armenian Street. That's that one. Then you've got the Kandasamy temple, which is in Rajapati Street, where Ramalinga Swamigal, Vadadar Ramalinga Swamigal has composed his verses on this deity. And this is a temple that not very well known. That's called Bairagi Madam. This is in Devarajamundri Street, NSC Bose Road corner. The British record speak of it as Lorraine Pagoda. Pagoda, of course, meaning temple, and Lorraine was Kechi Narayan, who was the father-in-law of Berisi Papa. He built this particular temple. So Kechi Narayan's temple became Lorraine's Pagoda, and that is the Bairagi Madam temple. These are all built by the rich Zubashis of Georgetown. The next slide, please. This is Alingal's Pagoda or Ekambreshwara Swami temple, which is on Mint Street, built sometime in the 1680s. And this was built by Alangata Pillai, who was that Kazi Veeranath Jr. And he was one among the 3 Indians who were made councillor of the Madras Corporation when it was founded in 1688. The Madras Corporation, as you may know, is the second oldest corporation in the whole world after the London Corporation. No other city boasted of a municipality before our city. Sometimes you think the way it works, it's still working in that way only. But in 1688, Madras Corporation was set up inside Fort St. George. Later it shifted to Yerevalu Chetty Street in Georgetown. It's only in 1919 that it shifted into Griffin Building. And Alingal or Alangata Pillai was one of the 3 aldermen, the other 2 being Venkatadri and Muddu Veeranna. It is no surprise that all of them were juniors of Kashi Veeranna. So you know in whose pocket the corporation was at that time. So out of the 12 alderpersons, 9 were British and 3 were Indian, and Alagata Pillai was one. Churches. The Armenian church. See, the English, when they came here, they trusted Christians in this order. The most trusted were the Armenians. Then the next trusted were the Germans. Then came the Danes. They were even willing to trust the French. The only variety they did not trust was their own Protestant Christian father who would come from England. They did not want any Protestant Christian to come from England to preach over here because he will find out about the number of marriages they are having here, the number of babies, the Anglo-Indian system which they were actively encouraging. So they didn't want that. They wanted all other kinds of Christians. The Armenians, incidentally, did not come as Christians. They came as business. And they were known to be the most honest people to do business with. They were very straightforward, faithful to one master, no matter what happened, and very diligent in their business practice. They were very wealthy, and they also believed in doing a lot of public good. In fact, the first bridge connecting Chennai to Guindy, what is today the Maraimalai Adigal Bridge, was built by an Armenian, Koja Petrus Uskan. And a plaque used to be there in Armenian, in Latin, and in English for a long time. Now they say that because of the metro railway, that plaque has been broken, but I have not gone there to see it. But Koja Petrus Uskan, who lived in the 1740s, he was the man who first built the Marmalade Bridge. He also built the steps leading up to the St. Thomas Mount. He also built the St. Matthias Church, which is in Veteri, which is where he was buried. Later his body was removed and taken back to Armenia. but the tombstone still exists over there. Now, this is the church that the Armenians built for themselves. 1712, though this structure by itself goes back to the 1770s only. It doesn't go back to up to 1700s. And this church, incidentally, there are no Armenians in this city. But it is maintained beautifully by the Armenian community from across the world. They fund the preservation of this shrine, and they have kept it open for people of all faiths to go there and pray whenever they feel like it. So, between 9 in the morning and 5:30 in the evening, on any day you can go there. There is a caretaker called Alexander who lives within the church premises. You have to meet him and say that I'd like to spend some time here. He'll allow you. The walls are so thick that you can't hear any sound of the Georgetown once you are inside the church. It's a haven of peace. It's amazing. You've got some of the tombstones of the old Armenians still left over there. You've got the huge bells in the bell strap. No longer, they don't ring any longer. It's kept in there. Kept spick and span. It's how a heritage building ought to be really maintained, with a lovely garden surrounding. And around 5 years ago, the Pope of the Armenians came down. We didn't know that there existed such a personality. But we were told that, those of you who were involved in the restoration, we would like you to all come. So we all went, and then we were really blessed by His Holiness, and then we spent some time there. But this is a place that is worth visiting. Next to the Armenian church on Armenian Street is the St. Mary's Co-Cathedral. This is the first Catholic church. After, if you discount St. Thomas, Sansom and all that in New Madras, you can call it that, this is really the first Catholic church. As I told you, they didn't want the English fathers, but they allowed the Catholics to come. So in 1658, a cathedral came up over here. So this is today the Cathedral of Madras. And then the Sansom is the Cathedral of Mylapore. So between the two, it's called the Diocese of Madras Mylapore. That is what they call it today. And this is the St. Mary's Co-Cathedral. And inside this came the first Catholic school for Madras city, St. Mary's Seminary, starting in 1838 and still going strong. Then, slowly, with peace, they became comfortable with Protestant churches being built in the city. And therefore, in 1801, they gave permission for the Loveless Church to be set up in a cutting off Broadway. And they said that, you can start your church over here. It's now called the William Charles Church. Because somebody said Loveless is not the kind of word that you can use for a church. So it was renamed as the William, because William Charles Loveless was the real name, the first priest who officiated in that church. Then it was renamed. Then in 1817 came Tucker's Church on Broadway. And this is still going strong. That is the parish hall of Tucker's Church. Opposite side is the church going to 1817. In 1835, Madras Christian College was started. Madras Christian College School was started, and that was where China Bazaar Road is today, the corner of next to Paris. That is where it stood. It stood in a series of classical buildings extending all the way down the road. And the shift from here to Tambram was only in the 1930s. Once they shifted, all the buildings belonging to the Madras Christian College were bought by various other companies and subsequently demolished. Most of the insurance companies you find, they all have their buildings here. They all came up on property owned originally by the Madras Christian College. The only remnant of the old Madras Christian College is the Anderson Church, which stands on NSC Coast Road. You also have the Mutiny Memorial Hall, which is at the corner of Evening Bazaar Road and at the intersection of Evening Bazaar Road, Parktown, and then what you may also call as Main Street, because Main Street effectively starts from there. And this was built because the First War of Independence or the Mutiny of 1867 really did not happen here. It took place entirely in North India. So the British who were here wanted to give thanks to God that they were spared the horrors of this mutiny, and therefore this was built. And if you go there, you will find on the pediment it is written, "The Lord has remembered us." That was a very powerful statement. It says that He remembered us, therefore we did not have a mutiny here. They were all safe. Today it is being used for it's the State Bank's branch. The Church of South India has rented it out to the State Bank. Then you've got not a shrine, but very much to do with the Christian philosophy, the Young Men's Christian Association, which came up just before the First World War, built entirely in the Jaipuri sandstone style, with GST Harris being the architect and our friend Nambermal Chetty being the contractor who built it. It's horribly maintained today, but it is really an architectural marvel, and this is where the Music Academy started in 1928. The first meeting of the Music Academy was in this building on 18th August. And when you go there, it's where people sleeping in the corridors, and it's a very, very bad way. But it is still a remarkable building. This is the old classroom of the Tondai Mandalam Tuluva Vedala School. So you had the Christian institutions, you also had the Hindu institutions. Among the Hindu institutions, the two of the most famous are the Hindu Theological School, which is on Mint Street. Both of them are on Mint Street, incidentally. Hindu Theological School and the TTV High School both began in 1888 and still going strong as educational institutions in Georgetown. You've got a number of other schools. You've got the Mungibai School, which is Ramnath Goenka's wife's name, incidentally. You've got Manilal Mehta School. You've got the Ewart School. You've got the Northwick. There are several institutions in the area. It's full of educational institutions. The Dufton School is still there. This is on Broadway, one corner of Broadway. So it's full of educational institutions, but catering to a class of people who are financially not affluent. Therefore, the quality of the schools have also dipped over a period of time. Incidentally, the Hindu Theological School is the first institution where the noon meal scheme was ever tried out. It was started by a man called Turuchi Rangasamy Iyengar, who was the principal of the school. He found out that children were not coming, and then when he found out why, they said our children have to go and work. That's why they are not coming to school. He said, I'll give them a meal every day in the afternoon. That's when the noon meal scheme was first started. Then the Madurai Saurashtra School copied this idea in the 1920s. Kamraj saw it, and then he introduced it across the state when he became the state president. That was really the place where the first time meal scheme was started. Then the communities, you've got the Chettis, Komati, Beri, Natukote, you name the Padmasaliyar, Vaniyar, every Chetti is there in that place. You've got the Gujaratis, Kherawals, all kinds of Gujaratis, Baj Kherawals, the Mods, the Lords, every variety of Gujarati. You've got the Marwadis, you've got the Jains, you've got the Kachhi Memons, who are all the Muslims from Gujarat. Muhammad Ali Sharafali and sons, Ibrahim Karim State, Karim Boy, what is that other one? Yunus State and sons. These are all the, Haji, I keep forgetting his name, Haji Ismail State and the other one, other Haji. These are all, they are all still there, still practicing. The famous Sag brand of umbrella made by Yunus State and sons is still, being used. And these are all businesses that continue here. Tegudar Street is full of Muslims today, Kati Memon. You've got a few other Anglo-Indians and others. And by way of history, you still have a Portuguese here. So you know that the Portuguese also lived on one corner of this area. So you've got lots of other interesting things. A bewildering variety of art. You name it, colonial architecture, you've got the classical, you've got the Indo-Saracenic, you've got the Indian, you've got the traditional village style of architecture with, courtyard, Mittam, Chennai, everything with a well inside the house, everything you find over here. These are three buildings that I've just put together. That incidentally is a very famous building. That's called Sudarshan Building, the last one. That used to be the clinic of Dr. U. Ramaraj. And then look at these two. These are all examples of old architecture, plenty of woodwork, which is why buildings in town keep catching fire all the time. And a peculiar set of streets. Mint Street, Old Jail Road, Armenian Street, Kanjitoti, Rattan Bazaar, Kane Bazaar, Mat Bazaar, Flower Bazaar, Fruit Bazaar, Broadway, Kotwal Tavadi, Elephant Gate, Mannadi, all, each one with a history to tell. Mint began in, the Mint really started operating here only in the 1840s. It's at one end of Mint Street, and this used to be a powder mill because it was very close to the old wall of the city. So the gunpowder had to be made here and given to all the cannon people who were operating on the wall, protecting the wall. This was the powder mill for the city, and after the powder mill ceased to exist here, the Mint, which was originally in Fort and then shifted to Sindhavlipet, finally moved here in 1840 and operated here for less than 20 to 30 years. But the old powder mill property was converted into the Mint, therefore it still deserves to be a heritage building. It's now the government stationery print. This is your famous Upper Achagam, Ananda Vigadan's second home. And here I think it's good to tell the story of Broadway. Why Broadway? really no longer broad, there is no way. But it is still Broadway because of a man called Stephen Popham, who was a lawyer and who first, it was actually the gutter into which all the drainage of Pedanayakkanpet and Muthayalpet would come and then go into the sea at a point called Kelly's Drain, which was next to where the High Court stands now. And it was Popham who bought that entire land, and everybody laughed at it because, what do you do with buying a gutter? This was sometime in the 1760s. But Popham was a genius. He said, the place where the central station stands today was a hill. It was a hillock. It was called Hog Hill or Narimaden in Tamil. He said, you build a wall, that's all fine. You've forgotten this elevation. They can position a cannon from there and bombard the city. So first, raise that hill to the ground. So they began the raising of the hill. Now, where do you store the sand for the raising of the hill? He said, fill my ditch. And therefore, the Attapallam, as it was called, was filled in and he got a prime piece of railway. Now, while the ditch was being filled, the sand was being kept in a place which became Mannadi. Mannadi, and that is the one way store that became Mannadi. So, Popham owned that entire thoroughfare and made it the European quarter of Blacktown. For the first time, Europeans began to come and live here. Those who could not find accommodation in Georgetown, and those who did not want to go and live in faraway places like Egmore and Mylapore and all that, they began to come and live in Broadway. So Broadway really became the European quarter of Georgetown and remained so for a long time, which is why the first theatre was here, the first newspaper started here. Madras Times started here before it became the Mail and then shifted out from here. And then, you've got the first theatres, they were here. The first restaurant, Harrison's of Broadway, most famous, they were all located in this place because they were catering to a European client. Kanjitoti. Why Kanjitoti? Because Madras was a benighted city, eternally known for its famine. All the time people starving to death. The 1877 famine, of course, being the most notorious one, for which Buckingham Canal was effectively built as a food for work program. Now this was the place where whenever a famine would come up, they would have a gruel dishing out center for people. So, people would assemble here and collect gruel and eat it. So, it was obviously run by a chieftain. So, it was called Maniyakaran Totam and Maniyakaran Satram. That became Moniger's Chowdhury in English. And this is the original Moniger's Chowdhury, which is inside that compound wall. This is now an old age home, and next to Moniger's Chowdhury is the Stanley Hospital. The condition for being admitted as an old person in this old age home is that when the person dies, the body will not be cremated or buried, but will be given to Stanley Hospital for research. That's the condition on which this is operates. So this is the Moniger Chowdhury and Kanjitoti. Even today, if you go there and ask a rickshawala Stanley, he will not know. Kanjitoti asked the reporting for me. And the Stanley is so clued into the culture of Georgetown that if a Komati Chetty goes there, the first thing they will say is Komati Chettiya. They'll ask you. If you say yes, they won't administer an anesthetic to you. Because the Komati Chettis in the whole world, the Komati Chettis are so inbred, they marry within each other that they have given birth to a rogue gene, that the moment they are administered the general anesthetic, they die. So in this hospital, they ask that question, Komati Chettiya? How no? Abdin Badal Sana, they give a different treatment altogether. It's only in family that you can find it. Nowhere else would they even know that, all this Kiptonian and whatever those other Sloan Kettering and Breach Candy, they wouldn't even know about these things. Here they will, about competition. Sriram Bazaar, this is one of the markets of town. This is still surviving as a market today, but slated for demolition because the court order is expected any time. The owners are fighting amongst each other. Moment it comes to, they demolish it and convert it into a multi-story building. This used to be the meat market for predominantly vegetarian Georgetown. The vegetarian market was, of course, the famous Koswal's market. Koswal's market, which used to be where Lone Park stands today. Lone Park is today known as Sriram V, and now it is taken over by Metro Railway temporarily for doing a lot of work. And from Lone Park they shifted into Koswal Chavadi. I don't know, I'm sure none of you have been to, except the people who are of my generation. In those days when marriage contractors didn't exist, you had to go to Koswal Chavadi to buy vegetables to conduct the marriage. And you can't buy vegetables 1 week in advance for a wedding. So on the night before the wedding at 2 o'clock in the morning, you would get out to Koswal Chavadi. And at 2 o'clock, it will be like a midday. Going on all the time. Lorries coming, vegetables being offloaded, women haggling at the top of their voices. And then you would buy the vegetables. By 5 o'clock, Koswal Chavdi would be silent. Everybody would have gone to bed. When the rest of the city was waking up, this would have gone to bed completely. That is where it stood, Koswal Chavdi, and then it moved to Coimbatore. That's where the market is. That was the vegetable market for now. Some of the early locations, the entertainment for the city really started with town. So the first cinema theatre, Mrs. Klug's Bioscope, is still standing on Broadway. That is the Sukrita Lakshmi Vilasa Sabha today. It's a defunct club, or it's a derelict club, if you can call it that. That is still there. That if you go in, you can still see a theatre structure and all that over there for screening films and all that. That's how it was. Then the schools were also used for the entertainment. So they would have concerts. So Tondai Mandalam School was used. Gokhale Hall, Pachepal's Hall, Soundarya Mahal, which no longer exists, but the other three buildings stand. The second theatre of Madras, which is the Mint Theatre. The Crown Theatre, which used to be in one corner of Mint. The building has gone, only the entrance arches remain. Built in 1914. And this is the Broadway Theatre, which is still functioning. A very unique theatre. Because the ground floor is a godown. And lorries will be coming and offloading bags of cement or whatever commodity is being stored there. Then in between there is a narrow entrance. You go in, there's a beautiful Art Deco flight of staircase with branches out in between. Then it again joins up at the top, and then you are in a terrace garden. In that now it's not a terrace garden, it's just an empty terrace. But in the old days, band used to play there, and coffee and snacks and biscuits would be given. And then the theatre is one floor, it's no 2 floors and all that. It's got a gradual incline. All the English movies of that time used to be here. Not Broadway, this is the Minerva Theatre. Minerva Theatre. Sorry, Broadway is also there, that is in Broadway itself. But that's older, that's later to this. Minerva Theatre is now known as Badshah Theatre. Still functions on Davidson Street. 5 years ago, everybody said Minerva Theatre has been demolished. And we all wrote articles about how great Minerva was and all that. We buried it. We conducted requiem, we mourned its loss, and everything was finished. Then I was going in a rickshaw with Stephen Hughes, perhaps the greatest scholar on Tamil cinema. He's an American living in England, and he and his wife, they speak perfect Tamil. They met in Chennai in Georgetown. They had their honeymoon in the Ajanta Hotel in Roypeta. When you put this up, don't put it up. Stephen will murder me if it And the first time when Stephen's wife Sarah invited my wife Shabda for dinner, she called and said, Saibama. That was the first question. So we went and had brilliant. Stephen is a very close friend. He lives in London now. He and I were sitting in a rickshaw, Stephen occupying 95% of it and leaning with one thumb swinging in the air. And then Stephen said, I don't believe that Minerva Theatre could be demolished. So I said, why do you say this? He said, have you gone and seen it? I said, no. He said, that is the problem with Indian research. And then he said, look behind you. There was a poster in Tamil which said, Indra Kashi, Minerva Theatre. So he said, if it is demolished, why was this cinema poster being put at yesterday? So let's go. So we both went, and sure enough it was there. Badshah Theatre. And, this is still there. Minerva Badshah. Broadway Theatre is still there. Tilak Theatre has been demolished. It was demolished around 3 months ago. Murugan Talkies, this is where the first Tamil talkie was screened. Cinema Central on St. Xavier Street, which later became Murugan Talkies. That is also being demolished just 2 months ago. But that theatre stood from 1931. So you know how old that theatre was. Then the Kochita. What is a city without its red light quarter? So Vadakalu Street in town, between post office and the other building on the other side, was called Vadakalu Street because there was a Vadakal running. There was a canal which used to connect the drainage of the city into the sea. That used to be called Vadakalu Street, and that is where the oldest red light quarter was, because the sailors used to come from the port and all the women would be there. Later on, a story developed that, they would sing, "Oh Sahib, come here," and the men would say, "Why do you call me?" which became, "Why do you call me street?" and which is why it became Vadakalu Street. But that had nothing to do with it because of that race. So today it is not possible to identify Vadakalu Street with certainty because all the streets connecting second line beach to first line beach have lost their name. They've become first line, second street, third street, and so on and so forth. So it's not possible to identify which exactly was Vadakalu. But Sengam Bazaar was a flourishing red light quarter as well. more a Devadasi quarter than a prostitute's quarter. There's a lot of difference between these two things. And there is a Draupadi Amman temple standing right in the middle of Sengam Bazaar. And so you know that is where this is Veena Dhanamal's house, one of the greatest courtesans of Georgetown, who died in 1938. This is in Ramakrishna Chetty Street. Then the other famous courtesan, Bengaluru Nagaratnama, who built the Samadhi for Tyagaraja and is buried next to him there. She also, her house is still there. It's called Saraswati Idam, and it is in Srinivasa Iyer Street in Georgetown. This is where several of them perform. Just outside Georgetown, Victoria Public Hall, in Parktown, where the Cuckoo of Calcutta, Gohar Jan, came and performed. Several others have given performances here. Some of the other famous dasis of town, the Kalyani daughters, Bhanumati and Varalakshmi, and Balasar, the dance icon, who was Dhanamal's granddaughter and was probably born in that house in Ramakrishna Chetty Street. Gokhale Hall, built by Annie Besant, where most of the drama and concerts used to happen, where Jawaharlal Nehru has spoken, where Rajaji has spoken, Periyar Ive Ramasamy Nayakar has spoken, Annadurai has spoken, Mahatma Gandhi has come, and yet the owners of the place wanted to demolish it 10 years ago. And then we took them to court, and the court said it cannot be demolished, but unfortunately the demolition work had already begun. So it is standing without a roof as of now. And for the past 10 years it is standing without a roof. The only condition here was that no Devadasi would be allowed to perform in this place. And Annie Besant has written it in her instructions for the operation of this place. So in 1933, when a woman from Madurai came to Madras for the first time seeking a performance opportunity, they would let her here. So they gave her a chance in Saundarya Mahal, and that was MS Subbalaxmi. Then the Tamil Isai Sangam built the Raja Annamalai Mandap, which is on Esplanade, opposite the Law College, one of the best known venues for music and dance performances today in Georgetown. Water bodies, they are coming right up to the end. You'll ask these slides or those slides. Seven Wells, Cochrane's Canal, Temple Tank, My Lady's Garden, water bodies and parks in town, Lone Spa, Madipunga. So Seven Wells is 10 wells actually, not 7 wells. But it is in one side of Old Jail Road, at the corner of Broadway and Old Jail Road. It's a huge compound belonging to the PWG. That was from where water used to be supplied to town, to Fort St. George. You know, Madras has got a peculiar problem because it is close to the sea. There is hardly any flow. So at a time when pumps were not there, you had to identify the right place so that it would have the gradient so that the water would flow and then build pressure up at a particular location. So this was identified as the best spot where the water could be supplied to Fort St. George. And Hyder Ali, when he came here, knew that this was where the water was being supplied. So he ordered for the water to be poisoned. So when the water was going to be poisoned, an Anglo-Indian soldier called Nicholas identified the activity and caught hold of the man who was going to poison the water and killed him with the knife that the man had himself brought. And when the East India Company got to know of it, they were so overcome with gratitude that for 150 years the Nicholas family was given the title of custodians of the Seven Wells. And that title ceased to, that 150 years got over only in the 1920s. Today Shane James is the last of the Nicholases. He comes from the same family. He's a big time architect in the city. He has in his possession that dagger which was used. It's come down as a family heirloom. And he's done a phenomenal amount of research on the ancestry of his family and the Nicholases. And they are all buried incidentally in a church in Seven Wells Street, which is called St. Roque's Church. That is where most of the Nicholases are buried. This is Krishnappa Nayakan Tank. Krishnappa Nayakan Tank is named after Tuppaki Krishnappa Nayak, who along with Bala Rao, who was the Nayak of Punamalli, had a huge siege once preventing goods from coming into Madras city. He had the East India Company at his mercy. So this is a huge tank which stands next to the Kashi Vishwanatha Swami temple. 15 years ago, this was a healthy water body. Today it's a sinking cesspit. Because all the connecting points for the rainwater to be discharged into this have been blocked. That way, several of Georgetown's temples have got tanks in them. All of them have gone dry. The Kashi Vishwanatha Swami, Arangata Pillai, that is the Ekambreshwara Swami, Chenna Keshava, Chennamallishwara Swami. Town has got a water problem. But if only these tanks were allowed to fill up once again with rainwater, the surrounding area water level will definitely go up, but that is not happening. Nobody is wanting to. They are making a big drama out of the fact that the Mylapore temple tank is full. But for one temple tank that is full, what about the other 300 or so temple tanks that are going dry? What are we going to do with all of them? That's the question. Then you've got a beautiful park which is just behind Central Station, Sriram Road, which is called My Lady's Garden. This is one of a huge garden area, almost as big as Cubbon Park in Bangalore, but sadly no longer like that today. This was called People's Park, and this was begun in 1856, 1857, and this is on which a large part of Central Station, Ripple Building, Victoria Public Hall, Jawaharlal Nehru Indoor Stadium, most of these things have come up on the old zoo used to be here before it shifted into Waterloo. This is all that remains of that, but it's a beautifully maintained park, but most of Georgetown comes here for walk in the morning. Green lung in an area where there are not many green lungs. Then Loans Park, which became Sriram V Park and now is temporarily being occupied by the Metro Rail. That is Tucker's Church, which you can see just on the other side. What is Georgetown today? This is the last slide. As you were right, it's 7. I thought I finished by 6:30. This is a civic nightmare. The problem, and it is the news for all the wrong reasons. Of course, it's an industrially, it's a depressed area of the city. We cannot deny it. Economically deprived and a depressed area of the city. But what is amazing is that some of the most richest, prosperous businessmen also live in this city. It is just that there is a complete negligence of this entire area. The first problem is all planning for this area is done just like planning for Adyar or MG Road or this Rajiv Gandhi Expressway. The same rules and regulations apply there also. So there also people are talking about parking space. They are talking about the fact that multi-story buildings can come up over here with large frontage, and they are talking about all kinds of things which will never happen. It is not possible to implement those kinds of things. This has to be recognized as a special district of the city. It has to be treated like Old Delhi. It has to be treated like the walled city in Hyderabad. It has to be treated like Jaipur, or it has to be treated like some of the older European towns where a certain part of the city becomes completely pedestrian or traffic flow is restricted. Secondly, all kinds of construction cannot be allowed, but there is complete, nobody is bothered about the kind of constructions that go on in Georgetown. A 2-storied building can suddenly come down and become a 5-storied building the next day. Nobody is preventing it. Most of the electric connections are temporary electric connections because most of the buildings are involved in litigation. So there is not clear ownership. When a property is going back by 350 years, and several of them are owned by trusts, with very small, low levels of rent being paid, several of the occupants in the Rent Control Act, the owners have no enthusiasm for protecting these properties or for even improving the area because they are not getting any income out of it. The tenants know that they are not owners of the property and therefore they are not bothered with it. Therefore, some of the buildings when you go there today, the new buildings, you are terrified and you just wonder what will happen if there is a fire, which happens all the time here, or there is an earthquake. There is no way that you can escape. You can only say your prayers and wait for the ultimate thing to happen. You just go. Your only joy you have is you are surrounded by silver, you are surrounded by gold, and other things. You die in very affluent circumstances. There is a lot of crime in Georgetown, definitely. That's because of the economic deprivation of the area. My theory is that Georgetown is so neglected because this is not the place from where you get votes. This is populated by people who don't speak the local language, ultimately. And several of them may migrate and go away one day. And therefore, it is left in a situation where let it collapse by itself over a period of time. Even the metro, which is coming up now, which is a great boon to this city, there is no doubt about that. Metro is definitely needed. When you send this mail saying that you can use the public transport. That is the kind of thing that we need to do. That is the answer for the congestion in this city today. But the way it is being handled in places like Main Street and all that, how are those machines going to come there? How is the underground boring activity going to happen? How will the neighborhood properties be affected? I don't think there is a study on those things at this point in time. Definitely there has been no public discussion on how it is going to happen. The water supply itself is a question. They are saying that among the most polluted areas as far as water is concerned is part of the city. How is all this going to take? I think that, fundamentally the first thing is to recognize that this is a special district and it has its own problems. And therefore, the kind of master plan that works for the rest of Chennai will not work in this area. With that attitude comes, then I think the next step is to call the public who live in that area for discussion. Some of the most articulate people live there. You ask them about their problems, they will tell you. And they all have workable solutions as well, because there is a strong community spirit in Georgia, which you will not find in the bungalows of Bishop Garden or Raja Annamaleshwaram and Kasturi Ganga Road and other places. There, their problem is the common problem of everybody, and they know that if a neighbor's building falls, your building also will fall because it shares a common wall. That community spirit is very high. That has to be kind of charged, and that has to be utilized for solving the issues that George talked about. Thank you very much.